It was Christmas morning. The room was full of laughter, the sound of paper tearing, and the smell of cinnamon rolls. They all wore matching silk pajamas, showing off gifts and taking pictures. I sat at the end of the couch with a small velvet box in my lap, a locket I had chosen carefully, with a picture of me and my late husband inside. I watched as each gift was opened. Even the dog had a toy, but nothing had my name. No one looked my way. I waited quietly, then asked, softly, if maybe something had been missed. She didn't even look up before saying, "You've had enough in life. Be grateful." Then she went back to her phone, smiling at everything but me. It wasn't the missing gift that stung, it was how easily they forgot I was still there. Thank you for listening to my story, it means more than you know. I don't know where you're watching from, but wherever that place is, your kitchen, your living room, maybe somewhere quiet where you can just breathe, I hope it feels safe. If you don't mind, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd really like to know. Because sometimes it helps just knowing someone out there is listening from somewhere real. That morning, sitting on that couch, I realized warmth isn't always about the heater or the blanket. Sometimes, it's the way a room can grow cold, even when it's full of voices. They were my family, not strangers passing through. The same people who once ran to me when their knees were scraped, who needed me when they couldn't sleep, who asked for help and never had to explain why. I didn't expect anything big that day. Just something to let me know I wasn't invisible. A card, a hug, a look. But there was nothing. Just the sound of wrapping paper, laughter I didn't belong to, and a silence so loud it pressed against my chest. I looked down at the little velvet box I had brought. A locket with a memory of someone who loved me without needing a reason. I laid it gently on the table, straightened the ribbon, and stood up. No one noticed. No one asked where I was going. I opened the front door and the cold outside felt warmer than what I left behind. The snow was falling soft, the kind that dances before it lands. And right there, standing alone, I said to myself, I gave them everything. They left me nothing but frost. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask anyone to follow me or explain themselves. I just closed the door behind me and stood still for a while, letting the cold bite gently at my skin. It reminded me I was still alive. I could hear the sound of music from inside, the kind they played every year, cheerful and bright, like nothing could ever go wrong in a house like that. I turned back and stepped inside one last time. The lights sparkled. The tree stood tall, but none of it felt like it was mine anymore. I walked upstairs, slow and steady, with the sound of my feet barely touching the carpet. I opened the closet and pulled out 2 sweaters, the warm ones I always wore when I needed comfort. I folded them with care and placed them inside a small plastic bag. I didn't need much, not this time. I reached for my scarf, the deep green one with soft edges, the one my husband gave me on our first Christmas together. He had saved up for it, said I deserved something soft around my neck after all the years of doing without. I held it for a moment, pressed it to my face, and then tied it gently around my collar. I looked at myself in the mirror. Older, yes. Tired, yes. But still standing. Still here. I walked back down the stairs, the sound of chatter growing louder the closer I came. Nobody turned to look. Nobody asked where I was going. But as I reached the door again, I heard her voice behind me. Casual and smug, like it was nothing. She said, "You'll come back. You always do." I didn't answer. I didn't turn. I just opened the door and stepped into the cold again. And in my mind, I said it so clearly I could almost hear it out loud. Not this time. The road was quiet as I walked. Not a single car passed, just the crunch of snow beneath my feet and the sound of the wind moving through bare branches. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. I remembered there was an old roadside motel just off the highway, the kind people barely glance at anymore. The sign flickered with one missing letter, and the front desk was behind glass so thick it made everything feel distant. The woman behind the counter didn't ask questions. She slid a key toward me and said, "Room 12. That was enough. I walked down the narrow walkway, past the ice-lined windows and faded curtains, until I found it. Room 12. I opened the door, and the smell hit me first. It was the scent of old coffee grounds and lemon cleaner, the kind they used to cover up whatever came before. The carpet had stains and the bedspread looked older than I was. But for some reason, it felt safe. Not because it was beautiful, but because no one could hurt me there. I set my bag down gently on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed. It squeaked a little under my weight. I looked around. Just 4 walls, a dresser, and a small table with a plastic lamp. But the silence inside that room wrapped around me like a blanket I hadn't felt in years. I reached into my bag and pulled out the only thing I had packed with care. A photo album, the same one I used to flip through with him on cold nights. I opened it slowly, careful not to bend the corners. There we were, me and the man who built a life with me out of nothing but love and long days. There was our son, so small in the early pictures, clinging to us like we were his whole world. And there I was, young and smiling, not knowing what waited ahead. I laid the album on the pillow beside me, gently, like placing an old friend down to rest. And then I let it come. The tears I'd held in through dinner, through the silence, through her words and his absence. They came without sound, just a quiet stream down my cheeks, warm against the cold that still clung to my coat. I didn't cry for a gift. I didn't cry for attention. I cried because it's a different kind of pain when you're erased by the very people you raised. And in that small, forgotten room, I let myself be remembered again. After the tears had dried and the room grew still again, I sat with the photo album open beside me, tracing each picture like it could speak. My fingers paused on one where we stood in front of the cabin, back when the paint was peeling and the roof needed patching, but our smiles didn't seem to notice. That old lake cabin wasn't much by most people's standards, but it held years of memories, summers spent fishing, winters with the fireplace crackling, birthdays and quiet weekends where we forgot about the world. After he passed, I held on to it even when I couldn't visit often. I paid the taxes. I kept it standing. I thought maybe one day I'd pass it on to them. A place where they could bring the children, where the laughter could continue, even if I wasn't there to hear it. It was her idea, really. She said she wanted to renovate it, turn it into a retreat or something modern, clean, and stylish. She spoke like it was already hers, and maybe, deep down, I thought it would be. I wanted to surprise them. I had everything ready. The paperwork was complete, just waiting for my signature. I placed the deed inside a folder and tucked it beneath the velvet box, the one with the locket. That locket held more than a photo. It held the memory of a love that never needed permission to give. On one side was my face, on the other, his. 2 people who built something out of nothing, who worked day and night to give their son everything we never had. I had planned to hand both over after dinner. I imagined the look on their faces, not because of the money or the land, but because they'd know they were trusted, chosen, honored. They were going to unwrap their future, and I was going to bless them with the past. That was the plan. But the way she looked at me, the way she spoke, like I was a burden, a relic, something to be tolerated. It changed everything. I reached into my purse right there in that motel room and pulled out the folder. The paper was still crisp, my name still at the top, but my hand, the one that had held them through sickness and sorrow, would not sign. Not after that. I slid the folder back in, folded the locket's ribbon around it, and closed the bag. That deed will stay right where it is, not out of spite, out of clarity, out of respect, for myself and for the years I spent giving without ever asking for anything in return. The morning came slowly, with gray light filtering through the thin curtains and the quiet hum of a heater that barely did its job. I had barely slept, but I wasn't tired. I just lay there with my eyes open, listening to the stillness, letting my thoughts rise and settle, one after the other. The decision wasn't sudden. It had been building for years, quietly, underneath all the times I was overlooked, dismissed, smiled at without being seen. But something about that night, something about how quickly they made me feel like a stranger in a house I helped build, pushed me to stop hoping they'd change. So I sat up, reached into my bag, and pulled out the envelope again. I looked at the paperwork, my signature lines still blank, the locket still wrapped gently beside it. My hands didn't shake, not anymore. I reached for my phone, scrolled through the contacts until I found the number. My advisor. We hadn't spoken in a while. I used to tell him to keep things simple, to keep everything in the family. But this time, I had different instructions. When he answered, I greeted him by name, my voice calm, steady. I told him I was ready to make changes. I asked him to remove certain names. Yes, all of them. I told him to adjust the estate, to pull the lake cabin out of the transfer plan. I said I wanted to redirect my assets, starting with the deed. I gave him the name of a group I had once donated to quietly, a place that helps women rebuild when life gives them no one to lean on. I asked if half of everything could go to them. He paused. I could tell he wasn't used to hearing that kind of request. Then he asked softly if I was sure. I looked around the room again, the faded walls, the sound of the cars passing outside, the album still lying open on the bed, and I said, yes, I'm sure. Donate half of it to women like me. Women who gave everything, who were told they were nothing, who were expected to smile through it, who were loved only when they stayed quiet. I told him to begin right away. And when the call ended, I didn't feel empty. I felt restored, like I had finally placed something valuable in hands that would never forget where it came from. That afternoon, the light in the room had started to fade, and I sat near the window, the same spot I'd settled into after the call with my advisor. Outside, the trees swayed under the weight of the wind, and the sky had taken on that pale blue-gray color that only comes in winter, when everything feels quiet, heavy, and honest. I had the album beside me again, but I wasn't flipping through it. I just rested my hand on the cover, like it was the only thing in the world that still remembered who I used to be before I became someone's afterthought. My scarf was still tied at my neck, the green one, the one he gave me all those years ago. I hadn't untied it since I walked away. It felt like the last piece of a promise that still mattered. I had made choices that morning. Hard ones. Real ones. I had changed my will, pulled the cabin out of the future they assumed belonged to them, and redirected my love, my legacy, to women who might actually understand what it means to be forgotten and still show up with open hands. My name was being lifted off papers where it once stood beside theirs, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was choosing myself. It was around that time when my phone lit up. Just one short buzz on the table. I didn't jump. I didn't rush to grab it. I looked at it the way you might look at an old photograph of someone who used to mean the world, someone you haven't quite forgiven but still remember in quiet corners of your heart. I picked up the phone and saw the message. No call. No voice. No pause where a human breath might sit. Just a line of text that stared up at me with all the warmth of a closed door. Hope you're okay, but you're being dramatic. Come home, the kids miss you. That was it. Not a word more. I read it again, slower this time, looking for something human in it, something that might sound like care. But it wasn't there. No, we miss you. No, we're sorry. No, I didn't mean it. No acknowledgement of what was said, what was left unspoken, or the silence I carried in my hands when I walked out their front door. Just a flat message, written like an obligation. Like I was an item they forgot to check off the list. And they said I was being dramatic. I could almost hear her voice behind the words, that clipped tone she used when she thought she was being clever, but was really just being cruel. And him? The silence between her sentences felt like him. Always quiet, always absent when it mattered, always letting her speak for them both. That message wasn't an invitation. It was a rope, loosely thrown, like they expected me to grab it just because they tossed it my way. But I've spent too many years pulling others out of storms, carrying loads that were never mine to bear. Waiting for love to return in a voice that never knew how to speak gently. I sat there for a long time, just holding the phone, staring at those words. I thought about everything I had done to be part of their world. Every meal I cooked when I was too tired to stand. Every smile I gave even when I felt invisible. Every time I bit my tongue for the sake of peace. And now, a text. Cold. Empty. Condescending. Not even a second of real thought behind it. I didn't reply. I didn't type out a long explanation. I didn't ask for understanding. I didn't demand anything. I simply pressed my thumb on the message and deleted it. Gone. Just like that. The silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt earned. Like space had been made for something better. Something honest. I placed the phone face down, leaned back in the chair, and closed my eyes. I wasn't waiting for anyone to check on me anymore. I wasn't hoping for a knock on the door. What I was waiting for was already happening. I was beginning again, not because they told me I could, but because I finally remembered I never needed their permission to walk away. The next morning, the sky was pale and dull, like it hadn't fully made up its mind about being day. I woke early, not because I had somewhere to be, but because my body had grown used to rising before anyone else needed me. Only now, no one needed me. And for once, I didn't move out of duty. I moved because the stillness inside me asked for a little light. I got dressed slowly, choosing the softer of the two sweaters I had folded in my bag, the one with the sleeves a little too long. I wrapped the green scarf around my neck again, not out of habit this time, but out of love. For the memory of him, for the part of me still healing. I stepped outside, the cold hitting my face like a reminder that I was free to go wherever I pleased. No schedules, no voices calling from the other room. Just me. I walked for a while, following the sidewalks until I saw a small coffee shop with big windows and a line of potted plants that looked like someone still believed in beauty. Inside, the air smelled like roasted beans and something sweet, maybe almond. I ordered a plain cup and found a seat by the window, where the light fell softly on the table. I didn't have a book or a paper, just the small velvet box I had slipped into my coat pocket that morning. I opened it quietly, not to show it off, not to draw attention, but to remind myself of what love once looked like. Simple, complete, unspoken. The locket rested in my palm, warm from my hand, the little clasp slightly worn from years of being opened and closed. I was holding it when a voice gently interrupted my thoughts. A young woman, maybe in her late 20s, with a soft face and a kind way of standing, asked if she could sit across from me. She said all the other tables were taken, but I think we both knew that wasn't quite true. I nodded, and she sat down with her cup, glancing at the locket, but not in a nosy way. More like someone who knew what it meant to carry small pieces of the past with you. After a few minutes of quiet sipping, she asked about it. I hesitated, then told her the truth. Not the watered-down version, but the real one. I told her about the night I left, about the gift I never got, about the words that were said without thought, but not without weight, about the silence that followed, and about the text I deleted without regret. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just spoke, and she listened, like she had all the time in the world. When I finished, she sat back in her chair, looked at me with eyes that didn't flinch, and said something I'll never forget. You don't owe anyone your silence, especially not the ones who used it against you. I didn't respond right away. I just sat there, holding that sentence in my hands the same way I had been holding the locket. And slowly, without thinking, I smiled. A real smile. The first one in longer than I could remember. Not because everything had been fixed, but because someone saw me. Not for what I could do, not for what I had given, but for what I had endured. And in that small coffee shop, surrounded by strangers and the smell of almonds, I felt something return to me, something I hadn't felt in a very long time. I felt like a woman again. A full one. Not an afterthought, not a fixture, but someone still capable of being understood. It was 2 days later when the message came. Not a text this time, not some cold line pretending to be care. It was a proper call. My son's voice on the line, softer than I remembered it, almost unfamiliar. He said they were having a family meeting and wanted me to come. Said it was important. Said everyone would be there. I didn't ask questions, I just said I'd think about it. After I hung up, I sat for a long time with the phone resting on my leg and the locket still in my hand. I didn't feel nervous. I didn't feel shaken. What I felt was steady, like my feet had finally found the ground after years of walking on eggshells. The next morning, I took my time getting ready. I laid out my Sunday best, the navy blue dress with the pearl buttons, the one I wore the last time I felt proud to be in a room full of people. I pressed my hair back the way he always liked it, neat and simple. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw someone strong. Not in the loud way people always think strength looks like, but in the way a tree stands after every leaf has fallen and it still knows it's not done growing. I walked to that house, the same one I had left in silence, and this time I walked in with my chin up and my voice ready. They were all there, sitting in the living room like nothing had happened. Like this was just another day. She was sitting on the armrest, legs crossed, looking at her nails. He sat beside her, shoulders stiff, eyes unsure. They had called me back like I was a problem to be solved, a loose end to be tied up before the new year. I didn't sit. I didn't take off my coat. I stood in front of them and looked at each one, not with anger, but with something quieter, something sharper. I waited until the room went still. No TV, no music, just them and me. And when it was quiet enough to hear the weight of what I had carried, I spoke. My voice didn't shake. It didn't rise. It was calm, even, deliberate. I said, I came here with gifts. I left with grief. I saw her blink, shift in her seat. I didn't stop. You told me I'd come back. You said it like a promise. Like I had nowhere else to go. But I didn't come back to make peace with you. I stepped forward just enough so they had to look up. I came to make peace with myself. I could feel every word fall between us like stones in water, slow and deep. I only returned to tell you this, I said, and my eyes didn't leave theirs. I am not yours to reduce. I am not some tired woman sitting in the corner waiting for scraps of affection. I am not your housemaid. I am not your placeholder. I am not your guilt to cover up with gifts when it suits you. No one spoke. Not even her. And that was the loudest moment of all. I took a breath, let it settle into the air around us, then turned toward the door. And as I reached for the handle, I didn't wait for a reply. Because I wasn't asking for anything. I had already taken back everything that ever belonged to me. I didn't wait for them to speak. I didn't stay to hear excuses or soft apologies dressed in guilt. I had said what needed to be said, not to hurt them, but to free myself from a weight I had carried for far too long. There was no anger left in me, no rage bubbling beneath the surface, just clarity and a kind of stillness I hadn't felt in years. As I stepped toward the front door, my feet didn't hesitate. They moved with the quiet certainty of someone who had nothing left to prove and nothing left to beg for. I reached for the handle, the same one I had turned so many times before, usually while carrying bags of groceries or birthday cakes or freshly folded laundry. This time, I was carrying only myself. My coat fell around me gently, and my scarf stayed in place like it was holding me together. I opened the door, and the cold air met me again. But it no longer felt like loneliness. It felt like honesty, like truth, like freedom. I stepped outside, and behind me I heard the soft sound of the door closing. It didn't slam. It didn't snap shut like a final goodbye. It sighed, like a long breath I had been holding for decades, finally let go. The kind of breath that leaves space for something new to begin. I stood on the porch for a moment, just long enough to feel the wind touch my cheeks, just long enough to know I wasn't the same woman who had walked into that room a few minutes earlier. I didn't look back. Not once. Because what I needed wasn't behind me anymore. I walked down the steps and onto the sidewalk, one slow step at a time, not with sorrow, but with something steadier. I wasn't walking away from them. I was walking back into my own life. A life that didn't revolve around being useful, only when it was convenient for others. A life that didn't require me to disappear just to keep the peace. A life where my love was still valuable, even if they never saw it. The air was quiet, but inside me, something was beginning to stir. Something old, something sacred, something that had waited a long time for my return. The days that followed were quiet, but not the kind that hurt. They were filled with small moments, the kind most people overlook, but I held on to like tiny pieces of healing. I walked every morning, even when the air was cold and sharp against my cheeks. It made me feel awake, present, real. I returned to the little coffee shop a few times, not to look for conversation, but because the stillness there made me feel less invisible. I sat near the window with my warm cup between my hands, watching the world move without asking me to chase it. One morning, I passed a flyer posted near the checkout. It was from a local shelter, the kind that helps women find their feet again after the world's kicked them down more times than they can count. They were asking for volunteers, help with meal prep, light cleaning, anything. I took the number and called that afternoon. A soft-voiced woman answered. She didn't ask for my resume. She just asked when I could come in. The next day, I showed up. They welcomed me like I was somebody, not like I was doing them a favor, and not like I needed to prove I was useful. I helped in the kitchen first, chopping vegetables while two other women hummed along to the radio. One of them smiled at me and asked where I was from. I said, I'm from somewhere I used to think was home. She didn't ask more. She just nodded, like she understood. I started coming in every few days, doing little things, quiet things. Folding linens, listening when someone needed to talk. Sitting with women who looked like they hadn't been seen in years. And somewhere in the middle of those days, I knew what to do with the cabin. Not out of bitterness, not as revenge, but as a gift that could still be sacred. I called my advisor again and asked him to move forward. I donated the cabin to the shelter, not for pity, for purpose. Before New Year's, they moved 3 women in. 3 women who had slept in cars, cried in bathrooms, kept secrets behind swollen faces. Now they had rooms, beds, a kitchen that smelled like hope. That old cabin, the one filled with laughter from a time before things turned cold, was warm again. Not because it belonged to my family, but because it now belonged to women who needed a beginning. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't post about it. I just walked past the file with my name on it and said to myself, that's how we rewrite what they tried to erase. I started doing more small things for myself. I bought a new pair of slippers from a shop downtown, soft ones, the kind with memory foam inside. I painted my nails a deep shade of red, not for anyone to admire, but because it reminded me I was still here, still allowed to feel beautiful. I planted lavender outside my motel window in a chipped clay pot someone had left behind. Every time I watered it, I thought of all the years I had poured into others without ever filling myself. And now, with each bloom, it felt like something inside me was beginning to bloom too. Every act I did was quiet, unnoticed by most. But to me, they were sacred. They were pieces of a life rebuilt not from what was given, but from what was taken back. They erased me from one home. I built another. One that didn't need permission, praise, or validation to feel real. One where my name was not forgotten, but written in gold by my own hand. It was a week into the new year when he came. I was sitting outside the motel room, in a chair someone had left near the walkway, sipping on warm tea and watching the lavender sway gently in the breeze. The sky was clear, the kind that makes you feel like something has settled, like the weather itself has taken a breath. I had just returned from the shelter, where I'd spent the morning helping a new arrival find a pair of shoes that fit. Simple, quiet work. The kind that leaves your spirit full and your hands steady. I heard the car before I saw it. The tires slowed over the gravel, cautious, like they weren't sure they belonged on that side of town. And then I saw him, my son, dressed in the same winter coat I bought him years ago, eyes puffy, face pale. He looked older than he should have. Grief can age a person, but so can guilt. He stepped out slowly, holding something in his hand. Maybe a letter, maybe just the keys. He walked up to me without a word, and I didn't move from my chair. I just looked at him. I didn't speak first. I had no reason to. He stood there for a while, shifting his weight, trying to gather whatever words he thought might fix what had already settled in the past. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked in places. He said he didn't realize how much I did, how much I carried. Said the house felt hollow without me. That the children asked where I went. That his wife, she regretted what she said. I didn't respond right away. I let the silence sit between us like a mirror. Then he said it. You'll always be our foundation. A sentence that was meant to comfort, maybe to honor me. But I had heard too many sentences like that before. Always after the damage was done, always when someone wanted to make their way back without walking through the truth. I looked at him, not with anger, but with something steadier. I said, no, I was your roof. I covered you in storms. I kept the wind off your back, the rain from your face. I patched every hole I didn't cause. I stayed steady when the ground beneath us cracked. And you let the house rot around me. He didn't know what to say after that. His mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. Because he knew I wasn't wrong. I stood up slowly. My legs had gotten stiff from sitting, but my steps were sure. I walked past him, gently. Not coldly, not cruelly. Just enough to remind him I no longer lived in the space of waiting for someone else to see me. He didn't follow. He didn't call my name. He just stood there, holding whatever words he hadn't had the courage to say earlier. I didn't hug him. I didn't reach for his hand or offer him comfort. But I didn't shut the door either. I simply walked back into my room, into the space I had made for myself, and closed the door behind me with the same stillness I had carried since the moment I left their home. Alone, yes, but not broken. Whole, entire. Not waiting to be asked back in. Not desperate to be remembered. Just standing fully in the life I had rebuilt with my own hands, one piece of quiet truth at a time. If you've ever stood in a room full of people and still felt invisible, if you've ever poured love into a house that only gave you back silence, if you've ever smiled through the sting of being overlooked, then this story was never just mine. It was yours too. If you've ever sat at a table where no one brought you a plate, if you gave your last warmth to a home that turned its back on you, if they handed you silence and called it love, then hear me now. You are not empty. You are not forgotten. You are not too much. And you never needed permission to leave. You just needed a reason. Comment if someone ever made you feel like furniture in your own story. Subscribe if you've ever had to walk away, not out of anger, but to finally be seen. Thank you for watching.